Finally, we'll look at participles. Cal is the only form that has both active and passive participles. All the rest of the stems have either passive or active, and they are inherently active or passive depending on which stem we're talking about. So the nafals will be typically passive, and the PALs will be active. The puals would be passive. The hithpal would be active, reflexive. The hiphil will be active, and the hofal will be passive. The nafal participles have the same prefix and R1 silent schwa as for the perfects, as well as up here in the alternate infinitive. The way that we tell a nafal participle, the theme vowel is a comets for the nafal participle. Notice that in all cases the theme vowel is a comets. It's sometimes called the irreducible comets. So even with endings on it, the comets does not reduce. That comets theme vowel is characteristic of the nafal participle. The rest of the participles are friendly because they all include a meme prefix. And so the pal, the pual, the hithpal, the hiphil, and the hofal all have a meme prefix. And in all of these cases, the meme prefix pretty much replaces the imperfect prefix. Notice for the pal, we have a meme with a vocal schwa, and we have a patach as our R1 vowel, which is pretty much like our imperfect, only the meme has been swapped in for one of the imperfect prefixes. And of course we have participle endings. Similarly, the other forms have the same prefix vowel and same R1 vowel. In all the cases we also have the doubled R2. Similarly, for the pual, we have the vocal schwa prefix vowel for the main prefix, and we have the characteristic kibbutz R1 vowel and the doubled second root letter. So the PL and the pual are very much like the imperfect, except the meme has been swapped in for the imperfect prefix. And we're dealing with noun adjective endings for participles. The hithpal, the meme replaces the hey, and so we get mitpakhed. Then we have the other participle forms with our typical participle endings. The hiphil swaps in a meme for the imperfect prefix. The prefix vowel is still your typical patach for the hiphil imperfect, and the expected silent schwa is under the R1 letter. And in all these cases, the hiphil has the hirikiod theme vowel, which normally indicates hiphil. And then the hofal, again the main prefix and the kametz hatuf is characteristic and definitive for the hofal. So the participles from pal to the right are very friendly because of these main prefixes. The nafal is a little bit trickier, but you need to look at the theme vowel, that kametz theme vowel for the nafal. Let's look at some examples. Our first example here is mivakashot. Mivakashot. So we look at our prefix vowel and our prefix. It's a meme with a vocal schwa. Meme tells us that we are at pal or anything to the right in the table. The vocal schwa tells us pal or pual, and the meme tells us participle. The R1 vowel is a patach, and that definitely tells us it's pal. We have a pal participle, and we do have R2 doubling, although we don't need to note that now. We already know it's a pal. The theme vowel reduces because of the ending. The participle ending here is ot, and that is our feminine plural, both absolute and construct. So we have a pal participle, feminine plural, absolute or construct, of bakash, and this would be ones who seek. It would be ones feminine who seek. Let's look at the next example here. We've got mashmide. Mashmide. Well, our hirik yod in the middle as our theme vowel pretty much tells us we have a hiphil, and this is also verified by the prefix meme, and the prefix vowel patak tells us we have a hiphil, and the meme tells us we have a participle. And the R1 vowel is consistent, the silent schwa is consistent with a hiphil. R2 doubling is not a factor. The theme vowel was helpful in knowing it was a hiphil before we even started. And the participle ending is masculine plural construct. So we have a hiphil participle, masculine plural construct of the root shamad, and in the hiphil this means to exterminate, and so we translate that ones who exterminate, and that would be in construct with something else in an actual sentence. Finally, let's look at our third example. We have nifkada, nifkada. And so we do have a prefix. It's a noon this time with a hirik. It could be a nafal participle. It could also be a nafal perfect, and it could also be a nafal alternate infinitive absolute. We have a lot of possibilities here. And even possibly a cal imperfect first common plural. Technically, noon plus hirik could be a nafal imperfect first common plural, but I cheated and already looked at R1, and a nafal imperfect would have to have R1 doubling and an R1 vowel of comets. So I've ruled that one out by looking at the prefix and R1 at the same time. That is, I see nif, and that's how you can approach it. So we need to look at the R1 vowel. The R1 vowel in this case is consistent with all of these: the participle, the perfect, the infinitive absolute, or the first common plural. So those go together. R2 doubling is not a factor. We need to look at the theme vowel here, potential nafal participle, and we see that it is a comets, and that tells us that we have a nafal participle. And so we then look at the participle ending. We have a he, which is a feminine singular absolute. So we're going to have a nafal participle, feminine singular absolute of pakad, and this will be one feminine who is visited. Note that if our vowels were just a little different, with a vocal schwa as a theme vowel, we would have nifkada, which is a cal cohortative first common plural. This is why it's very important to look at the theme vowel, because a nafal participle will always have a comets as a theme vowel. So that completes our look at the strong verb system. We have looked at the perfects, the imperfect derivatives, and then the infinitive absolute, the participles. I suggest that you practice, practice, practice. Keep parsing forms, and if you practice, you will get this down.